Today I'm going to be showing you how to install the K-tuned clutch master cylinder and slave cylinder. Okay, so we're going to be installing this on a 2006 Acura TSX. So inside of this kit you're going to get a new clutch line, a new clutch master cylinder, and a new slave cylinder. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these opened up and show you how to put it together. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and get started here by emptying out the clutch fluid reservoir, and then we're gonna go ahead and drain the clutch fluid line. So if you don't know, this is your brake fluid reservoir. This is the one for the clutch pedal, the small one with the gray cap. So we're gonna go ahead and empty this one first. Go ahead and remove the cap. And you will want to keep some paper towels handy, because if brake fluid gets on your paint, it is really bad and it will eat through your paint very quickly. So I'm just gonna go ahead and lay a couple towels down just in case. And here I've got my brake bleeder, and I'm just gonna go ahead and pump the tube in and start sucking out the little bit of fluid that is in here. Alright, so that only took a couple pumps to get it cleared out, and we're gonna go ahead and drain the line next. In order to bleed the rest of the clutch line, you're going to need to follow the hard metal line here all the way down to the slave cylinder, which is going to be right here under the throttle body. I'm trying to see it. Let me see if I can. So you can see here it's got the two bolts on it with the line running, and that's where it enters into the slave cylinder. Just to the left of that is a black rubber nipple and a bleed valve. So there you can see where I have it, the light shining on it. You're going to need to take off that black rubber cap and use an 8mm wrench. Now, because of the difficulty getting in there, I highly recommend using the closed inch of your wrench, so that once you slide it on, it stays in place and it's not going to drop down into the engine bay on you. So I'm gonna go ahead and get set up to finish draining this. Okay, I have my bleeder set in place, as well as my wrench is connected to the bleeder valve. So what you want to do here is take your wrench and twist it towards the rear of the vehicle. That will open the valve so that you can drain the fluid out of the line. Now this is pretty tight in here, so it helps if you have smaller hands. Okay. Alright, so I've cracked that bleeder. Now I'll go ahead and start pumping out the fluid. Finished draining the clutch line, and here you can see that we extracted approximately 30 milliliters of fluid. So now that this is finished, we're going to go inside the car and start disconnecting the pedal from the clutch master cylinder. So now inside the car, under the steering wheel column here, there is a single screw here to remove this plastic cover. So we're going to remove that one screw. And then once that screws out, this piece will just pop out of place. Okay, with this panel out of the way, now you want to remove the lower panel, and all you have to do is grab it and pull straight down. Okay, now behind the clutch pedal, here there's going to be a 12mm nut here to remove. And then up here on the diagonal from it is another 12mm nut. And then it's hard to see, but right up here you'll be able to see a cotter pin that needs to be removed that's connected to the clutch master cylinder shaft. I removed the two nuts, the pin and the little retaining pin from the master cylinder on this side. Tip: when you're removing the top left nut, shove a rag up here behind this plastic panel at the top by the wire harness, because when I removed my top nut, it slipped out of the socket and fell behind here, so then I had to spend 15 minutes pulling this panel off and getting back behind it to retrieve my nut. So, you know, learn from my mistakes. Next, I'm going to remove the two 12mm bolts from the clutch slave cylinder. Next, you want to remove these two 10mm bolts holding on the clutch line bracket. I've removed all of the bolts and all of the connectors holding the clutch line in. So we'll go over this real quick. I had to pull out the fuse box here to give myself some more room. Just a couple of 10mm bolts, but as you can see here, there's a clip right here holding the line on. You follow the line up, there's a bracket here that's held in by one 10mm bolt, and to the right of that was the other bracket that's held in by 2mm bolts, two 10mm bolts. And then if you follow the line back, and at this point here you can see that where the blue coating is on the clutch line, it is going to be held in place by two of these plastic clips. They were pretty difficult to get under and pop out, but you do need to get those out in order to get the line removed. And up here on top, I have removed the 10mm bolt holding the reservoir in. So now all that's left is to wiggle this whole thing out. Alright, so what I ended up doing was loosening the four nuts holding on the brake booster inside of the car. They're just to the right of the two nuts that hold on the clutch master cylinder. And with that, I was able to lift that up and slide the clutch line out underneath of it. So now I should have full access to remove the whole thing. Alright, so here we go. The clutch master cylinder and the clutch slave cylinder with the entire line has now been removed. So now it's time to start prepping to put the new one on. Alright, now we have the old one out and we need to start moving some pieces over on to the new one. So the first thing I'm going to start off with is the clip here for the clutch pedal. The one that the new one came with here is going to be slightly wider than the OEM one. So we're going to take this one off and transfer it over to the new one. The first thing we want to do is make sure that we set this nut to the same length as the factory one. You're just going to have to line these up and measure them to make sure that the lock nut is at the same position as the factory one. And so in order to remove the clip here from the factory one, you're going to need a 12mm wrench. You have to lock it on and then get you a set of channel locks and twist it off. Okay, broken that loose, and then that will spin right off. And then we're going to grab our new one, and note that this is a 13mm nut on the one from K-Tuned. And then we're just going to spin that on. And once it meets up, we'll grab our 13mm wrench, lock it in place, and using our channel locks, we will snug this up. All right, so that is now nice and tight. Okay. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the reservoir. So then just take your needle nose, loosen your clamp, and then this should twist off with a little bit of effort. Okay, so we'll go ahead and set that to the side for the time being. Next, we need to install the pin into the slave cylinder. So you need to apply just some slide grease to it, just the normal grease that you would on a brake caliper. So you're going to apply that to both the shaft and the head of this pin. All right, so we got that in, then you just want to pull the rubber boot up until it clicks into place, and then you're going to apply just a little bit more grease to the head of it. All right, now we're ready to attach the line to the master and slave cylinder. So we're going to go ahead on the master, remove the plastic protective cover, and you want to use this U-shaped one. And we're just going to pop it on and start it off just finger tight. And then here you want to use a 17 and a 13mm flare wrench. So we'll drop the 17 on first, and then we'll drop the 13 on second, and we'll twist these in opposite directions and get these nice and tight. All right, so that's good to go. Next, we'll do the slave cylinder, and we'll do the same thing. We'll put it on and go finger tight first. And then we will start with the 17mm, and then followed up with the 13. And just twist these together in opposite directions. All right, and then we have connected these together and they are ready to be installed on the vehicle. I forgot one last step. we need to reattach the reservoir. So I've removed the plastic cap, and then just like the old one, we'll slide that on, grab our pliers, and slide the clamp down into a lock position. All right, so now this is ready to be installed. Okay, so here we're reinstalling the new clutch master cylinder, and we're just taking the reservoir and the cylinder itself back underneath the way we took it out. So here I've already started wiggling it through. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop up the reservoir first. Okay. So that's out of the way. Now I have a little bit more room to look in here and see what I'm doing. You're probably gonna want a flashlight handy for viewing in here to help you align the clutch master cylinder back into the hole through the firewall. All right, so got the clutch master cylinder under and through into the firewall. I ended up needing the help of a second person to help align it from the inside, as well as keep pressure on it while I rethreaded the bolts, the nuts from the inside. Getting that top left nut back on was not easy. I had to use a wobble extension to get up and around the corner to install the top left nut back onto the clutch master cylinder from the inside, and then I used the power driver here to tighten it down as quickly as possible. But once that was done, the rest of the inside went really smooth, and now the clutch master cylinder is attached to the firewall and it's ready to go. So now I'm going to go ahead and insert the bolt back in for the reservoir, and then we'll get the slave cylinder installed. Okay. So we're just going to go ahead and start this 10mm bolt back in by hand as best we can. All right, that's started. Okay, the reservoir is ready to go. Next, we will get the slave cylinder installed. Okay, so we've got the clutch master cylinder installed, and before I put the slave cylinder on, I'm going to go ahead and bleed this while I have easy access to this bleed nipple before I put it back on. Instead of trying to deal with it down there while it's loose, and this is a fairly flexible cable, let's take advantage of that and bleed the line beforehand. So here I've got a brand new bottle of Honda brake fluid, so I'm gonna go ahead and open my reservoir and we'll go ahead and get that filled. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and remove the rubber nipple, the rubber cap from the nipple. Go ahead and set that aside, and we'll take our 8mm wrench and we'll go ahead and loosen this up. Okay, so now that's loosened, we'll put on the bleeder, and we will go ahead and start sucking the fluid through. So we'll go ahead and give this a few pumps, and I can see that the reservoir is draining, so I'm gonna go ahead and top it off before I continue pumping. All right. Okay, get that tightened up. Then pop it off and suck the rest of that fluid through. All right, so now we have a baseline bleed on the line. So now we'll go ahead and get the sleeve cylinder installed. So before I start putting all this back together, I'm gonna go ahead and, instead of leaving the new clutch line loose and flopping around, I'm gonna reuse these original clamps because they'll just go right around it, and we can pop that back into the factory location and help hold that down and keep that line in place so it's not loose and looks a little bit cleaner. So I'm gonna go ahead and install, I've got 2 of these that I kept, so I'm gonna go ahead and get these installed, and I'll show you where I put them and how you can too. Okay, so I've reused that factory clip here, as well as the factory rubber mount off the stock line, and I've just gone ahead and popped that back into place. That'll give this a little bit of wiggle room, but it should stay right there. And then I also retained one back here in the rear. So those should help keep that line in place. Okay, so now we're ready to install the sleeve cylinder. So we're going to start by putting it under, and this ball head here is going to push against this lever. Hopefully you can see here where I'm touching. So we're going to start by putting that against the lever, and then we'll turn it into place and then put the 2 12mm bolts back. Alright, the new clutch master cylinder and sleeve cylinder are installed with the new line. We're ready to start putting everything back together and fill it with fluid. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and do one quick drain on the clutch line, and we're going to go ahead and get this reassembled and get it tested. Alright, so we got the fuse box back in place, the battery back in place, everything's buttoned up and ready to go. Line is bled, tested the pressure on the pedal inside, and it feels good. So now I'm going to get the air intake back in here, and we're going to call this job done. So in total, with brakes and everything, this took me approximately 6 or 7 hours. Again, start to finish, with a couple meals in there, over 2 days, and just take your time. It's really getting that clutch master cylinder out and the new one in is probably the most difficult and frustrating part of this whole job. I'm going to go ahead and take the rest of that brake fluid and bleed the brakes so I don't waste any of that new fluid, because make sure you don't use an open bottle of brake fluid, because that stuff does absorb water, and once the bottle's opened, it really needs to be used as quickly as possible, and then the remainder needs to be recycled. So I hope you found this video useful, and thank you for watching.